Captain Jonah Blake had salvaged hundreds of derelict vessels in his 15-year career, but nothing had prepared him for the Solaretha's crown. The Etherian dreadnought hung in the void like a crystalline cathedral, its bioluminescent hull pattern still pulsing faintly after 3 centuries of drift. The distress beacon that had drawn his salvaged ship Reclaimer to this forgotten corner of space transmitted in frequencies that shouldn't have been possible, quantum harmonics that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "Jonah, you need to see these readings," called Engineer Maya Santos from the sensor station. Her dark eyes reflected concern as she studied the scrolling data. "This ship isn't just drifting, it's caught in some kind of temporal anomaly. Time flows differently across its hull sections." Jonah floated over to examine the scans, his magnetic boots clicking against the Reclaimer's deck plating. The Etherian vessel was massive, easily 10 times the size of their own ship, its elegant curves and impossible angles defying conventional engineering principles. The energy readings were unlike anything in the salvage databases. "Any signs of life?" Jonah asked, though he knew the official records declared the Etherian Empire extinct for over 2 centuries. "That's what's strange," Maya replied, her scanner chirping with increasingly complex patterns. "There are biosignatures, but they're frozen. Like everything aboard is suspended between one moment and the next." Jonah had heard stories about Etherian quantum mysticism, their legendary ability to blend advanced technology with forces that bordered on magic. Most spacers dismissed the tales as superstition, but staring at the impossible geometries of the dreadnought, he found himself reconsidering. "Prep the boarding pod," he decided. "Whatever's over there has been waiting 300 years. I'd like to know what's important enough to keep broadcasting after all this time." The docking process felt surreal, as if they were connecting to a ship that existed only partially in their reality. When the airlock cycled, the atmosphere that rushed out carried scents of ozone and something floral that had no name in human languages. Stepping aboard the Solaretha's crown was like entering a museum where time had stopped mid-breath. Etherian crew members stood frozen at their stations, their translucent blue skin shimmering with interrupted thought patterns. Their bodies showed no decay, no sign of the centuries that had passed, simply perfect preservation in temporal amber. "It's like they're all sleeping," Maya whispered, her voice echoing strangely in the crystalline corridors. "But sleeping while standing, in the middle of their duties." Jonah moved carefully through the ship, noting how the bioluminescent wall panels responded to his presence with faint pulses of recognition. The ship itself seemed aware, watching him with the patient intelligence of something that had been waiting for company. The throne room lay at the vessel's heart, accessible through corridors that seemed to shift and reorganize themselves to guide him forward. When Jonah finally entered the vast chamber, his breath caught in his throat. Queen Lyrilleth Vosandra sat upon a throne of living crystal, but she was not simply frozen like her crew. Chains of condensed starlight and shadow bound her wrists, ankles, and throat, their surface covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly. The chains pulsed with malevolent energy, clearly the source of whatever force held the ship in temporal stasis. The queen herself was breathtakingly beautiful in an otherworldly way that made Jonah's heart ache. Her skin shifted between pale blue and silver like captured moonlight, and her hair flowed in impossible currents as if moved by solar winds. Though her eyes were closed, her face bore an expression of profound sadness, as if even in suspension she was aware of her imprisonment. "Jonah," Maya's voice crackled through his comm unit, "I'm reading massive quantum fluctuations from your location. Whatever those chains are made of, they're anchoring the entire ship outside normal spacetime." Jonah approached the throne cautiously, his scanner failing to analyze the chain's composition. As he drew closer, he noticed that the queen's chest rose and fell in the barest suggestion of breathing, and her closed eyelids flickered as if she were dreaming. A data terminal near the throne activated at his approach, displaying historical records in flowing Etherian script that his translation software struggled to parse. Gradually, the tragic story emerged. Queen Lyrilleth had attempted a forbidden ritual to save her dying homeworld, planning to sacrifice her own life force to reignite their failing sun. Her court wizard, Lord Thane Vexmoran, had stopped her with this curse, binding her in stasis to prevent what he saw as unnecessary martyrdom. The curse shall hold until one pure of heart and untouched by Etherian magic freely offers comfort to the queen, Jonah read aloud, his voice barely a whisper in the vast chamber. Only then shall the bonds of starlight shatter and the crown be lifted. As he spoke the words, the queen's eyelids fluttered, and for just a moment, Jonah could swear he saw the faintest glimpse of violet irises tracking his movement. She was aware, trapped in her own body for 3 centuries, conscious but unable to act or speak or even properly sleep. Jonah found himself taking another step toward the throne, drawn by an inexplicable urge to ease the suffering of someone who had endured alone for longer than most civilizations existed. The chains pulsed with warning energy, but the queen's face seemed to relax slightly at his proximity, as if his presence offered the first comfort she'd known in ages. "Maya," he said into his calm, never taking his eyes off the imprisoned monarch, "I think I know why that distress beacon has been transmitting for 300 years. She's been calling for help this entire time." For 3 days, Jonah found himself returning to the throne room despite Maya's warnings about prolonged exposure to the quantum field. Each time he approached Queen Lireleth, he felt an inexplicable pull, as if invisible threads connected his consciousness to hers across the barrier of the curse. "You're playing with forces beyond human understanding," Maya argued as they analyzed the ship's data banks in their temporary quarters aboard the dreadnought. "The temporal distortions are getting stronger. We're aging 3 hours for every hour we spend near that throne room." Jonah rubbed his temples, trying to dispel the strange dreams that had begun the first night. In them, he walked through cities of impossible beauty, crystal spires that sang in harmony with stellar winds, gardens where flowers bloomed in colors that had no names, and always, the queen's voice calling to him from somewhere just beyond sight. "The ship's archives contain the complete history of the Etherian Empire," Jonah said, gesturing to the holographic displays surrounding them. "According to these records, Queen Lireleth ruled during their golden age. She wasn't just a monarch, she was their greatest quantum mystic, capable of manipulating reality through will and ritual." Maya studied the historical files, her expression growing more troubled. "And this Lord Thane who cursed her, he was her court wizard and, according to these personal logs, deeply in love with her." The revelation hit Jonah like a physical blow. He'd been so focused on the tragedy of the queen's imprisonment that he hadn't considered the emotional complexity of her captor's motives. The curse wasn't an act of malice, it was a desperate attempt to save the woman he loved from her own nobility. The ritual she planned would have killed her, Jonah realized, reading deeper into the technical specifications. She intended to convert her entire life force into stellar energy, sacrificing herself to reignite their dying sun. And instead of letting her die a hero, he trapped her in eternal stasis, Maya said softly. "That's either the ultimate act of love or the ultimate act of selfishness." That night, the dreams came more vividly. Jonah found himself standing in a garden of crystal flowers, facing Queen Lireleth as she appeared before her imprisonment, vital, beautiful, and radiating the kind of inner light that drew people like moths to flame. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice like wind chimes made of starlight. "The curse creates connections between minds that touch its influence. You're risking your sanity by maintaining contact with me." "You've been alone for 300 years, Jonah replied, surprised by his own boldness in the dream space. "No one should have to endure that kind of isolation." The queen's expression softened, and for a moment, her regal composure cracked to reveal the frightened woman beneath. "Lord Thane thought he was protecting me. He couldn't understand that some responsibilities are worth dying for." "Tell me about your people," Jonah said, settling beside her on a bench that seemed to grow from the crystal ground itself. What followed was a conversation that spanned the dream equivalent of hours, as Queen Lireleth shared memories of the Etherian Empire at its height. She spoke of cities that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, of children who learned to manipulate quantum fields before they could walk, of a civilization that had achieved perfect harmony between technology and what humans would call magic. "We were dying, though," she admitted as the dream garden began to fade. "Our sun was collapsing, and even our mastery of quantum forces couldn't prevent it. The ritual I planned was desperate, yes, but it was our only hope. Jonah woke with tears on his cheeks, the queen's loneliness echoing in his heart like a physical ache. He made his way back to the throne room, finding her exactly as he'd left her, motionless, bound, but somehow more present than before. "I know you can hear me," he said, standing just beyond the reach of the starlight chains. "I've been researching the curse, trying to understand how to break it safely." The queen's eyelids fluttered, and this time Jonah was certain he saw awareness in her violet gaze. The chains pulsed with agitated energy, as if responding to her emotional state. Maya appeared in the doorway, her scanner showing readings that made her step back in alarm. "Jonah, the quantum fluctuations are off the charts. The ship's pocket dimension is becoming unstable." "What does that mean?" Jonah asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "It means we have maybe 6 hours before the dimensional barriers collapse entirely," Maya replied grimly. "This whole ship will either return to normal space catastrophically or disappear into quantum foam forever." Jonah looked back at Queen Lireleth, seeing new details in her face that suggested she was fighting the curse's hold with increasing desperation. The proximity of dimensional collapse was weakening the bindings, but not enough to free her before they all died. "The curse requires someone pure of heart and untouched by Etherian magic," Jonah murmured, recalling the inscription. "Someone has to touch her willingly, accepting the consequences." "Jonah, no," Maya said sharply. "You don't know what those consequences are. For all we know, touching her could transfer the curse to you." But Jonah was studying the quantum equations that comprised the curse's foundation, his salvager's instinct for understanding complex systems revealing patterns that others might miss. The curse wasn't designed to transfer, it was designed to test. Lord Thane had created a lock that would only open for someone who approached the queen with genuine compassion rather than selfish desire. He loved her too much to let her die, Jonah realized. But he was also wise enough to know that someday, someone might love her enough to set her free. As if responding to his words, Queen Lireleth's eyes opened for the first time in 3 centuries, meeting his gaze with an intensity that took his breath away. In those violet depths, he saw not just awareness but desperate hope, and a warning that whatever choice he made would change both their destinies forever. The Reclaimer shuddered as dimensional fractures began tearing through its hull, reality warping around them like a funhouse mirror made of space and time. Maya's instruments screamed warnings as the pocket dimension containing the Solareth's crown started collapsing into itself, taking both ships with it. "Jonah, we need to leave now." Maya shouted over the growing cacophony of stressed metal and failing systems. "The dimensional barriers are cascading. We have minutes before everything gets compressed into a singularity." But Jonah couldn't tear his gaze away from Queen Lireleth, whose violet eyes remained fixed on his with desperate intensity. The starlight chains binding her to the throne were fluctuating wildly, their energy patterns becoming chaotic as the curse's anchor points destabilized. Through their shared dream connection, he felt her consciousness pressing against his mind, trying to communicate something urgent. Images flashed between them. Not words, but pure understanding. She was showing him the true nature of the curse, the hidden mechanisms that Lord Thane had woven into its quantum structure. "The touch that breaks the curse must be freely given," Jonah whispered, understanding flooding through him. "Not sacrifice, compassion. The curse tests intention, not just action." Another violent shudder ran through both ships as a section of the Reclaimer's engine compartment vanished into dimensional fold space. Maya grabbed Jonah's arm, her face pale with terror. "Whatever you're thinking, don't," she pleaded. "We can find another way. There's always another way." But Queen Lireleth's eyes were filling with tears that couldn't fall due to the temporal stasis, and Jonah felt her 3 centuries of loneliness crashing over him like a psychic wave. She had endured isolation that would have driven anyone else to madness, sustained only by hope that someday, someone would care enough to free her. "She's not just a queen, Maya," Jonah said softly. "She's someone who has suffered alone for longer than human civilization has existed. If I can end that suffering by taking her place, Maya's voice cracked. Jonah, the curse could trap you for eternity. Is she worth your freedom? The question hung in the air as reality continued to fracture around them. Through the throne room's crystal walls, Jonah could see stars wheeling in impossible patterns as the pocket dimension's collapse accelerated. They were running out of time for debate. But as he stepped toward the throne, Queen Lyriletha's consciousness suddenly blazed against his mind with urgent denial. Through their connection, she showed him the curse's final secret, the one detail that Lord Thane had hidden even from her. The curse wasn't designed to transfer to whoever touched her. It was designed to recognize pure intention and shatter completely if the touch was motivated by genuine compassion rather than heroic self-sacrifice or selfish desire. Lord Thane had created not a trap, but a test that only someone who truly loved the Queen for herself could pass. She's trying to tell me something, Jonah said, pressing his hands against his temples as the psychic connection intensified. The curse, it's not what we thought. Images cascaded through his mind, Lord Thane's final moments as political chaos consumed the Etherian court, his last desperate hope that someone would understand the true nature of what he'd created. The wizard had loved his queen too much to let her die, but he'd also been wise enough to create a prison that could become a doorway for the right person. The touch has to be motivated by love, not duty, Jonah realized. Someone who wants to comfort her, not save her. Someone who sees the woman, not the queen. Another dimensional cascade tore through the ship, and this time the throne room itself began to warp. The crystalline walls stretched like taffy, and the air filled with the sound of space-time screaming under impossible stress. Queen Lyriletha's eyes met his one final time, and in them Jonah saw not just desperate hope but deep, abiding love, not romantic love, but the profound connection between two souls who had found understanding across species, time, and the vast loneliness of existence. He didn't approach the throne as a hero or a savior. He walked forward as someone who had spent 3 days learning about a woman who had carried the weight of an empire's hopes and fears, who had been willing to die for people who barely understood her sacrifice, who had endured centuries of isolation with grace and dignity. Maya, get to the escape pods, Jonah said quietly, never taking his eyes off the queen. If this doesn't work, at least one of us should survive to tell the story. Jonah. That's an order, he said gently. Thank you for being my friend. As Maya's footsteps faded down the corridor, Jonah stood before the throne where Queen Lyrileth waited, her chains pulsing with the rhythm of a dying heart. The dimensional collapse was seconds away from claiming them all, reality folding in on itself like origami made of starlight and shadow. I don't know if this will work, Jonah said softly, reaching toward her bound hand. But no one should have to face eternity alone. His fingers touched hers just as the pocket dimension reached critical collapse, and the starlight chains exploded into brilliant fragments that dissolved like morning mist. Queen Lyriletha's eyes opened fully for the first time in 3 centuries, and the last thing Jonah saw before the universe went white was her smile, radiant, grateful, and utterly beautiful in its freedom. Consciousness returned slowly, like surfacing from the deepest ocean. Jonah opened his eyes to find himself lying on crystalline ground beneath an alien sky painted in shades of violet and gold. The air hummed with energy that felt both foreign and familiar, and when he sat up, he realized he was no longer aboard either ship. You're awake, came a voice like silver bells, and Jonah turned to see Queen Lyrileth approaching. She was no longer bound to her throne, no longer frozen in temporal stasis, but moving with the fluid grace of someone finally free after centuries of imprisonment. Where are we? Jonah asked, noting that his body felt strangely light, as if gravity here followed different rules. The quantum realm between dimensions, Lyrileth replied, kneeling beside him with concern evident in her violet eyes. When the curse broke, it released enough energy to tear us both free from the collapsing pocket dimension. We're safe, but... She gestured to the strange landscape around them, where geometric patterns of light formed and dissolved in constant flux. But we're not exactly in normal space anymore, Jonah finished, understanding the implications. Maya? My ship? Safe, Lyrileth assured him, her hand touching his arm with gentle warmth. The dimensional collapse expelled them back into real space before we were caught in the energy cascade. Your friend is probably searching for us right now. Jonah felt relief wash over him, followed immediately by wonder as he truly looked at Queen Lireleth for the first time. Free from the curse's influence, she seemed to glow with inner light, her translucent skin shifting through subtle hues like captured aurora. She was beautiful beyond description, but more than that, she radiated a presence that spoke of wisdom earned through suffering and strength forged in isolation. I need to thank you, she said softly. For 3 centuries, I existed in a state between life and death, aware but unable to act, watching the universe change while I remained frozen. You gave me back my existence. I couldn't leave you there, Jonah replied simply. No one deserves that kind of loneliness. Lireleth's expression grew complex, mixing gratitude with something deeper. Lord Thane designed the curse well. It required someone who approached me not as a queen to be saved or a prize to be won, but as a person who needed comfort. You saw my suffering and wanted to ease it, not because of duty or heroism, but because of simple human compassion. As she spoke, the quantum realm around them began to shift, responding to her presence and will. Jonah watched in amazement as she unconsciously reshaped reality, creating a garden similar to the one from their shared dreams, crystal flowers that sang in harmonious frequencies, paths of condensed starlight, benches that grew from the ground at her gesture. This is what you can do? Jonah asked, marveling at the casual display of power that seemed as natural to her as breathing. Quantum mysticism, Lireleth explained, a sad smile touching her lips. The art my people perfected before our sun began dying. I can manipulate reality's underlying structures, bend space and time to my will, even traverse dimensions. She paused, her expression growing distant. But none of it could save my people when they needed it most. The ritual you planned, Jonah said gently. To sacrifice yourself for your homeworld. Would have failed, Lireleth admitted, surprising him. Lord Thane was right about that, though I didn't realize it at the time. My life force alone wasn't sufficient to reignite a dying star. I would have died for nothing, leaving my people without their queen and no closer to salvation. Jonah felt the weight of that revelation. 3 centuries of imprisonment, all because of a misguided but noble attempt at sacrifice that wouldn't have worked anyway. So what happens now? Your empire is gone, your people scattered. Not gone, Lireleth corrected, her eyes brightening with renewed purpose. Scattered, yes, but not extinct. During my imprisonment, I could feel them through the quantum connections that bind all Etherian consciousness. Refugees hiding on distant worlds, survivors maintaining our culture in secret, children born with abilities they don't understand. She gestured, and the quantum space around them displayed a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy, with points of light indicating Etherian populations scattered across hundreds of star systems. They've been waiting for a sign that their heritage isn't lost, that there's still hope for renewal. And you're that sign, Jonah realized. We are, Lireleth corrected gently. The curse's breaking has sent quantum ripples throughout the galaxy. Every Etherian alive will know that their queen has returned and that the time of hiding is over. Before Jonah could respond, reality shimmered around them, and Maya's voice crackled through dimensional interference. Jonah? Jonah, if you can hear this, we're tracking massive quantum signatures from your last known position. The entire sector is lighting up like a Christmas tree. Lireleth smiled, raising her hand and somehow reaching across dimensional barriers to touch the communication signal. Your friend is resourceful. She's managed to detect our quantum signature despite the dimensional displacement. Can you get us back to normal space? Jonah asked. Of course, Lireleth replied, but her expression grew uncertain. But Jonah, once we return, everything changes. I'll need to contact my people, begin the work of rebuilding our civilization. You'll be part of something much larger than a simple salvage operation. Jonah considered the implications. Abandoning his career as a salvager to help rebuild an ancient empire, becoming part of a story that would reshape galactic politics. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. 3 days ago, I was just a guy who collected scrap metal for a living, he said with a rueful smile. Now I'm apparently helping to restore an extinct civilization. Life has a strange sense of humor. Lyriletha's laugh was like music, the first genuine joy Jonah had heard from her. Lord Thane always said that the universe has a way of putting the right people in the right place at the right time. Perhaps he was more correct than he knew. She stood, offering her hand to help him up, and Jonah noticed that her touch still carried the same electric sensation he'd felt when breaking the curse. The connection between them had become permanent, linking human pragmatism with Etherian mysticism in ways that neither species had imagined possible. Ready to change the galaxy? Lyreleth asked, her eyes sparkling with mischief and anticipation. Jonah took her hand, feeling reality bend around them as she prepared to transport them back to normal space. With you? I think I'm ready for anything. The quantum realm dissolved into starlight, and they emerged aboard the reclaimer to find Maya staring at sensor readings that defied explanation. Throughout the galaxy, long-dormant Etherian technology was awakening, ancient beacons calling scattered children home, and the first ships of a reborn empire were already moving toward their queen's position. The curse was broken, the queen was free, and the universe would never be the same. But as Jonah watched Lyreleth begin the work of contacting her people, he realized that some chains, once broken, revealed themselves to have been doorways all along.